we're seeing most estimates be that cash usage is going to still continue in the upper teens for the next 3 years.
Welcome to Behind the Vault. Our guest today is Gregg Margosian. Gregg is the Chief Operating Officer of Toshiba Global Commerce Solutions, who works in retail store systems around the world. But today we're going to talk about consumer behavior in the U.S. and how that ties into payment systems. Thanks for being with us, Gregg.
Rach, good to be here. We're looking forward to the discussion.
So I know one of the things that we were talking about beforehand was really the growing trend in self-checkout and a lot of the things that you're seeing. But why don't you start us off a little bit by talking about what exactly Toshiba does in this space?
Yeah, I mean, Toshiba is, as you said, is in the solutions business. What that means simply is we provide hardware, software, and services to solve retailer problems. And that's probably the simplest definition of a solution we can give. And so if you go into a Kroger or a Albertsons or a Costco or a BJ's and you see either Toshiba or IBM on the equipment, that's my team. We about 12 years ago were part of IBM, and we were part of a spin out that was moved over to Toshiba. So that's what my team does across the U.S. Everything from small mom and pops all the way up to the big retailers.
And this is mainly brick and mortar retail we're talking about. Do you get into e-commerce at all, or kind of multi-channel?
Our way in is usually through brick and mortar, and then the back end software that we have now, we have something called Alera, which actually will integrate with back end commerce systems that many of our retailers have.
So it's really soup to nuts for how your customers collect money from their customers.
Exactly. Collect money. There's elements of keep the money. What I mean by that is loss prevention. So stealing. So we have some great technologies to help retailers minimize that in their stores. And so it's everything from shelf technology all the way through the checkout we provide. And I don't like talking about the technology as much because it's really about solving the retailer problem, solving the problem that we bring retail technology to help them with.
So what are some of the trends or things that you're seeing, particularly kind of post-COVID? How has the consumer behavior been changing, and how are retailers reacting to that?
Well, COVID was very interesting for us. So it provided us a insight that we may not have otherwise had. So what do I mean by that? So when you look at the data from a payment side, we saw a bump in mobile payment. So it got up to 2020, it got up to roughly about 3% of payments was through mobile. And then in 21 and 22, it dropped back down to basically less than 1%, which is where it's been before COVID and after. And so people try to say, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, I think the stickiness of mobile, and the big growth, it's still ahead of us when pure contactless, pure mobile. The top, as most of us know in this industry, is Apple Pay. Number two is really Starbucks, believe it or not. We Americans love our coffee. Number two mobile payment is Starbucks. So we did get some insights there that the stickiness of that approach once COVID left, it didn't stay. And in self-service, if you're like me and you have different news feeds, you would swear that there's this massive backlash now on all things self-checkout. But reality is the numbers are that 85, this one cracks me up, 85% of us believe that self-checkout is faster than waiting for a cashier. And I laugh because I know that even though I sell this stuff, there are certain use cases in self-checkout that I'm really not very good at. And for instance, vegetables, well, let's just say I'm not good. And so, but 85% of us believe that. And so the growth in self checkout continues. There's about 50, depending on you believe, 50 to 55% of all the checkout lanes in a store are now self checkout, and it continues to grow. So that phenomena, even though you'll read about every so often a retailer who says, wow, for good reasons, we're fed up with it. And sometimes you'll see it, it's a really around theft. We are bringing some really good technology around theft to help them reduce the loss there. That momentum of growth is continuing.
So what's pushing that? Is that the retailers looking for cost savings or speed, or is it more consumer demand?
I think it's actually both. So the retailers are looking, each person in the front of their store, depending on the state, that could be a union worker or just a type of worker that's actually just hard to recruit. And so they would rather hire a person to help with stocking shelves and helping with customer service than just doing the checkout. We are pulling it as well, in the sense that belief that I can be quicker in the checkout lane, and I do get it to a point, because there's usually a pool. Most retailers will have a pool of self checkout lanes, and so you don't have to worry about being that guy who picked the slow lane, because I'm that guy. I picked the slow man lane. My lane goes slow. With a pool of self checkout, you don't have to worry about picking the wrong lane. You'll go to the next available. And
so kind of consumer sentiment, that's where you're kind of coming, or that's where the retailers are trying to solve for?
They're solving for consumer sentiment, but are also solving on their side of where's the best place to deploy labor. Where's the best place to deploy labor? So, we say, well, there's a social element to that. We're at like 60% now of shoppers who actually even prefer interacting with a self-checkout machine than they are a cashier. 60. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. The best compliment a retailer can have is, I, as a shopper, went in their store, they had what I wanted, and when it was time for me to check out, I was able to do it quickly.
And is that across categories, or does that play more in like grocery and big box or something else?
So certainly strong sentiment and a high volume. So we would say grocery, big box. Even some of the stores where you can go for gasoline and then go into the store, there's that sentiment there.
So this is in response to what customers are asking for. They are kind of voting with their feet, voting with their dollars for more self-service capability for their experience, right?
Yes.
Okay. And how is that changing? I mean, you already kind of talked about the lack of stickiness around like the NFC and mobile payment. How does that change things? Are we seeing things like less cash, for example? Does that drive into it?
Yeah, that's also interesting, because in 2020, we saw cash be roughly 19-20% of the transaction volume in the U.S. Depending on the year, 19-20, and it's really continued 21, 22. So, there's a stickiness factor to cash usage, which is beyond just it's quicker to use a debit card, it's quicker to use a credit card, and because it kind of interacts with culture. So what does that mean? You look at Europe, for instance. Germany, most would say, is probably the top as far as technology deployment and technology and engineering. Yeah, even to this day, they have the highest usage of cash in Europe. Why? It's culture. There's a culture thing. You look at self-checkout in Europe, the UK, United Kingdom, one of the highest usage in the world of self-checkout. Why? There's a culture thing, and there's a lot to it why that's the case. So if you believe that there's a culture thing, we're seeing most estimates be that cash usage is going to still continue in the upper teens for the next 3 years. And so that's really where it is now. It's really where it's been since 2020.
And is that a global number or that's a U.S. number?
That is definitely a U.S. number.
U.S. number. Okay. And how is U.S. behavior in this realm? How's that different than rest of the world, either the way it is or the way it's going?
Boy, it really depends on the country.
Mm. Well, specifically for the U.S.
How does U.S. compare to the other
countries? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What's unique or different about the U.S.? How does it stand out?
Yeah, I had a buddy of mine tell me about his travels to China. I was trying to remember exactly how many years ago it was, Rich, but it was probably 12. And I remember when he came back, he was telling me about that China had just skipped over the whole contactless card, and they were dead on with the mobile app on their phone. And he told me about a couple, and how everywhere he went, he would see it. And so I think that whole comment about your culture affects your usage is definitely true for the U.S. as well. So we see growth across debit and credit, and I think we can't see when the mobile payment gets higher than 2%, at least for the next 3-year span. Doesn't mean it won't, but it's still heavily driven by Starbucks traffic. Mm-hmm. The numbers very heavily driven, and you say, well, why is that?
Which is their prepaid card, right? That's
exactly
kind of what we're talking about. Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you say, why is that? And I say, well, you can do all the analysis you want, but remember the last few times you've tried to use your card or your mobile app and do it. I can remember trying to do it with PayPal one time. Let's just say it didn't work. So I ended up pulling out my credit card. and it's not unique. And so we haven't made it as frictionless perhaps yet as it would need to be adopted. So I think that's where we are in the U.S., and then there's, the real-time traffic with FedNow, which is your guys' world. You know that way better than I'll ever know. And you know that we're not necessarily seen as a leader in that either.
Mm-hmm. And is there push from retailers to look at that as like an alternate channel or an alternate way to collect money?
Not that I've heard. Not that I've heard. That it might be, not. There's some that still push back on contactless payment because they, I think it's still, that's considered a, card not present transaction. Mm-hmm. So, their fees are higher. So there's still that what I call basic level pushback from the high volume guys.
Okay. So what's in the future? I mean, everybody kind of went through a major technology change around chip card and the whole EMV compliance. What, 5 years ago? Was that kind of the end of that cycle?
Yeah, maybe a little bit longer. We did the first cycle where we didn't really do contactless, which I find is funny because the countries that deployed it before us learned quickly that they had to deploy contactless because it added, depending on which technology, 20 seconds to the checkout experience, which is eternity for the high volume guys, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think. But to answer your question, what's the next? What is the next technology? I do think that cash will be with us for a while. We're seeing legislation in certain cities and even states mandating that retailers still have to accept cash. In my business, I like it because cash handling, bill and coin, that technology is, you got to watch out for counterfeits. So there's a lot of technology in that. And so, particularly with self-checkout, that selfishly helps us. But I do think the cash will continue. So I wouldn't bet against cash going away or even checks for a while. I do think the breakthrough in mobile will happen. Um, there there will be more simplicity that comes and better acceptance. It just doesn't work as seamless yet as it should.
And do you think there's like a player that's going to consolidate that, or is this like every retailer has envy around what Starbucks has been able to do?
I do think one of the wallet guys will get it. I think the China example I was giving you earlier, one of them was
Mm-hmm.
around Wemo, another one was WhatsApp. And so depending on the culture, they will let that happen. We just haven't seen it as strong yet in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Not yet, at least.
But less likely that every retailer has their own payment solution native to their store and their app.
Correct. Correct. Many are adding it. Many are adding it to their app, but it kind of works in their store, if you will, only. And that's not the spirit of it working in multiple environments.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because this is not the regulatory environment for a big tech player to come in and say we're going to take over payments.
Mm.
I say maybe we'll see, but like that doesn't seem to have been the case so far.
Now you think about like you think about the Apple, right? The Apple scenario. What we
Sure.
set up contractually, you give up. I think it's you give up 15 basis points per transaction. 15. I think you give 15 basis points for credit, and I think you give up half a cent for each debit transaction. And as far as we can tell, they're the only ones that have been able to get those terms, and you can't pass those on to the consumer. So one of the bigger players they eked out a little bit. Um, so the dynamics of strength in the U.S. maybe are a little bit different
Yeah.
than else.
And Goldman, their big player on the back end that was doing the banking for them, is trying to get out of it right now.
Right.
Like they did not find that to be a profitable business for them. And
No.
it maybe they were the wrong partner to kind of go with on the consumer side, but
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a saying in retail, and it basically says that every new technology is additive. There's very few things that actually go away. And anyone who's around it laughs.
yeah.
But I actually remember, boy, I think how many years ago this was. I think this was the 80s that I worked on this project, 1980s. We did a project to figure out whether or not debit cards, that when you shop with your debit card, you got the same effect as a check where you buy more high margin goods in a store. And so we did this system just to prove that. And I don't even want to tell you the prediction of when cash was going to go away because debit cards were coming. Because it's hilarious. We still have 18, 19, 20% of all transactions are cash. So, credit cards came along. They didn't eliminate cash. They didn't eliminate checks. Debit cards didn't eliminate anything. Nothing goes away. And so these poor retailers in the U.S., they're having to constantly support new things. And that's another challenge, keeping them all working.
So what do we have to look forward to for this year, for 2024? What do you think the big themes are in this space?
I think there'll be more. I think there'll be more improved self-service that we as consumers will see. There will be more opportunities to pay different ways. We are seeing that. I do think that the time to check out and pay almost universally is gotten predictable and is back to the levels before we introduced the chip technology. Right? It's chip technology, while good from a card counterfeiting, did slow down the checkout process for a lot of scenarios. But I do think with the quick chip technology and also with contactless, those speeds are now to where they were before that. So that is good. I do think we'll actually see more loss prevention technology deployed in stores. If you read anything in the news, that is something retailers are struggling with. Fortunately, some of the artificial intelligence technologies are big help for that. And so we'll see that. And the goal is those of us who are good actors and pay, we don't want to be slowed down because of the small percentage of people that aren't good actors. And so that's what we. I think we'll see more of those techniques.
Okay. Well, this has been great. You've given us a lot of stuff to think about and look forward to. If anybody was interested more in what you guys do or about Toshiba, where can they go to find out more?
You got a website, Toshiba Commerce, 2 words concatenated, toshibacommerce.com. And you can read about the solutions we're providing, and we'd love to work with you.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us, Gregg.
Thank you, Rich.